music stopped, so it must be time. Instead of like playing me off, the music stopped to come on. All right. We're going to be reading from 2 Corinthians 12, 8 through 10. I read from New Living Translation, but I'm not sure what'll be up here, but just follow along as best you can, okay? Sorry. All right. 2 Corinthians 12, 8 to 10. This is Paul speaking. 3 different times I begged the Lord to take it away. Just even that phrase, begged the Lord to take it away. That sounds like desperation, right? It sounds like Paul is plagued by something and he's desperate to get rid of it, right? Each time he said, God said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses, and in insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Okay. So 2 things from there. My power works best in weakness. My power works best in weakness. And then at the end he says, when I am weak, then I am strong. Okay. So this is Paul's talking about a recurring prayer, a struggle that he had with God, a back and forth that he had with God. God, please take. He says he begged God to take this away. Whatever it was, it doesn't actually say, right? The thorn in Paul's side, that's all we really know about it. But he begged God to take it away, and it was told no. Interesting. God intentionally harbored a weakness. He protected a weakness in Paul, something that he could have taken away, cured, solved, because he's God. And it made sense to Paul. Why wouldn't you take this thing? God said, no, I'm gonna keep this thing so that you stay dependent on me. Okay? God's aim for Paul and for us is dependency on him. Okay? I used to think of the characters of the Bible as like heroes of the Bible, and they kind of are. But the way I thought about it was they had something to offer God, and that's why God chose them. That's why God picked them for his team, right? You know, remember when we play sports, everybody would line up, and you have 2 captains, and they would pick, and inevitably they pick the person that's best at that sport first, typically, because they want to win, right? So they're categorizing people in their mind by strength and by skill, and you go, okay, I want you on my team, and that's how that worked, right? It was a bit of a perspective shift for me that the people God chose in the Bible, the stories, they're not these awesome people most of the time. They're kind of messed up a lot of the time. Even like Abraham, who is, if you read, like the Israelites just go on and on about Abraham, our father Abraham, and he's, all this stuff, and they just go on and on about that. But if you start reading about Abraham, you're like, Abraham's got some problems. Like their family was not very functional. It was very dysfunctional. It was really there were some problems that were in Abraham. He's constantly scared of what people think of him. He lies all the time, and there's these things about Abraham. You're like, really, that guy? And that was the one that God chose to be the father of that whole nation and be an exhibit for his power on earth, for his presence and realness. He said, that's the guy. I sometimes think about Mary, right? She chosen to be the mother of Christ, and it's interesting. It doesn't really give us a lot about Mary, except for that. What we can take away culturally is that she was probably a teenager. She was very young. She was probably uneducated, because I think in that time and place, women didn't get the education. I think some of the males would go to and be like learn under a rabbi, but she was very unnotable I've heard some people say, well, she had some sort of characteristic and some sort of character strength or something like that. She was, I don't even know, but it appears it was more about her commonness. It was more about her unnotability that made her who got picked, which is interesting. One of the ones that actually I was reading a prayer on book, and this sort of just blew my mind, was talking about Jesus and his dependency on the Father, on God. Now, Jesus is God. So he doesn't have weakness. He doesn't have sin. He doesn't have character flaws. But let's read John 5, verse 19. If I can find it. Oh, yes it is. John 5:19. So Jesus explained, I tell you the truth, the Son can do nothing by himself. He does only what he sees the Father doing. Whatever the Father does, the Son does also. Right? My mind starts to blow up when I get into the intricacies of theology around this, honestly. But one he's talking about is dependency with the Father. The Son and the Father are the same. The Son and the Father. The Son does nothing without the Father. Right? And he's talking about dependency on the Father, right? They're tied together. It cannot get away from each other, right? So dependency is really what I want to pull from this, is what is being exhibited here. I stay with the Father stays with me. We cannot be separated, okay? The weakness in Paul was the thing that tied him to Christ. The weakness in Paul was the thing that kept him dependent on Christ, because otherwise he could start to think, like, I got this, and can just do things on his own without God. So what happens when we drift away from dependency on God? We stop praying a lot of the time. We stop praying, right? I got this. I can handle this. Even very small things. That's one thing I've learned about myself. I don't pray about small things. I don't pray for, God, please provide my meals today. God, please keep a roof over my head, because I got this, right? I work a job, but who's to say what'll happen with that job? Who's to say what'll happen with my house? Who's to say? Okay? So I don't pray for those little things, because I'm not dependent on God oftentimes in those situations, right? So that's one thing, is that when we're not dependent on God, we stop praying. We start taking care of things ourselves, which is a bad idea. One other thing that can happen when we drift away from dependency on God is anxiety start to build up. So when things are good, we stop praying, right? Maybe. When things are bad, you start to feel all those things rise up, because how am I going to handle this? How am I going to solve this? All of us on some level have been in those situations where it's like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know how I'm going to take care of this. And that whole emotion, that whole response starts to build up. That's a good flag. That's a good sign that we need to press in deeper with God, press back into God. So when things are kind of good, it's like, okay, I'm not praying as much. When things are bad, I start to get emotionally unbalanced and start to see that come out in myself. So just a very simple thought. That's really the aim here. That's really the aim. Dependency on Christ. Stay close to him in all things. In all things. Now, one thing I want to say about this is I'm not talking about like abuse and name calling for yourself. Oh, I'm just a dirty, rotten, yada, yada, yada. That's not what this is. It's recognition that we can't control outcomes. That's what it is. That me on my best day and bringing my best offering and really on my game, once it's out of my hands, it's out of my hands, I'm really going to do my best to be the best parent I can to my kids, and to put good people around them and bring good things into their lives and get them a good education, encourage them towards success. I want those things, but I can't control those things. I can't make it happen. I really want them to have a relationship with God, and I'm going to do my best to place them in environments and stage them for that, but I can't make it happen. It goes back to God's grace and dependency on him, that he'll control the outcomes in every aspect of our life. So again, this is not, I'm just no good, rotten, dirty, because it's recognition that I'm human and that God is God, and putting things back into perspective and going and just making him God again and naming him for that in our lives. So, yeah. So just maybe think about that through your week and what, where are those areas, where are those times when you start to drift away from dependency on God. I'll